Even now, when I think back to that day, my chest feels heavy. It was the day I truly understood what fear means. Not the kind you imagine, but the kind that settles quietly into your bones. At the time, I was working at a small company in Yokohama. That entire day had been off from the beginning. My boss had already snapped at me twice for small mistakes, and by late afternoon, even the air inside the office felt wrong. It was only around 4 p.m., yet the sky outside looked like evening had already fallen. Thick clouds hung low, pressing down on the city. From the windows, you could see faint flashes of lightning far away. Everyone kept glancing at the clock, hoping to leave early. The first rain of the season had started, soft at first, but heavy enough to darken the streets. By 5:30, the mood inside the office had turned uneasy. Most of the people who stayed lived nearby. I was the only one who had a long commute back home. I didn't dare ask my boss if I could leave early. His mood was already bad. That's when he stepped out of his cabin, still talking on the phone. He hung up, walked straight over to my desk, and looked down at me. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked. I didn't even ask what it was. I just nodded. He told me he needed me to deliver an envelope of cash to a friend of his who was admitted to a hospital on the outskirts of the city, closer to the hills. He said taking my motorcycle would be faster than going by car, especially with the traffic and rain. A few minutes later, he handed me a cloth pouch with money inside and scribbled down a name and ward number. I grabbed my bag and rushed out. By then, the sky was completely covered. The rain had turned heavier, and thunder echoed between buildings. My bike refused to start at first, and those few minutes of kicking the starter only added to my irritation. The hospital was at least 40 minutes away, and from there my home was in the opposite direction. Eventually the bike started, and I took off. By the time I reached the hospital area, it was around 6 p.m., but the place already felt deserted. What confused me was that I couldn't find the main gate. Rain poured down so hard that visibility dropped. I stopped under a wall for shelter, and that's when I noticed an older man walking past, holding an umbrella. I asked him where the hospital entrance was. He pointed behind me and said, "Go straight and turn right. The big gate is there. You're standing behind the hospital." When I turned, I saw an old, low hospital building behind a fence. Most of it was dark. Only one window on the upper floor flickered faintly. As I thanked him and moved away, he stopped me. "Don't use the back gate," he said quietly. "Even if it looks open, that side isn't meant for people anymore." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked off into the rain. Something about his tone stuck with me. Still, I had a job to do. I rode ahead, but barely 100 meters later, my bike sputtered and died. I checked the tank. Empty. Standing there in the rain, with thunder rolling overhead, my eyes drifted back toward the hospital, and toward that faint, flickering light, still blinking like it was trying to be noticed. I stood there for a long moment, rain soaking through my clothes, staring at the dark outline of the hospital. With my bike out of fuel and the storm getting worse, pushing it all the way to the main gate felt impossible. Against my better judgment, I turned back toward the broken rear entrance the old man had warned me about. The gate was half open, its metal frame bent and rusted. A weather-worn sign hung crookedly, the letters barely readable. As I pushed my bike inside, something strange happened. The lights came on, not one by one, but all at once. The entire building lit up as if someone had just flipped a switch for me. The sudden brightness made my heart jump. I actually let out a nervous laugh, convincing myself that the power must have just come back. I parked my bike under a cracked awning and walked toward the entrance. Faded letters above the door read, "Maternity Wing." The paint was peeling, and the glass doors were dusty like they hadn't been used in years. Inside, it was silent. No nurses, no patients, no footsteps, not even the echo of a TV or radio. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with something older, sour. I took a few steps in. All the lights shut off at once. The darkness swallowed everything so completely that I froze. My own breathing sounded too loud. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but my voice felt small and wrong in that space. Thunder cracked outside. I backed out instinctively, and that's when I noticed it, light spilling onto the ground from behind me. When I turned, I saw that same upper floor window flickering again, like a signal. As I stood there, a dog emerged from the shadows near the trees. It wasn't barking at me. It was staring upward, directly at that window, whining softly. The sound made my skin crawl. My phone rang again, my boss checking in. I told him I'd found the ward and would call after delivering the money. Ending the call, I forced myself to move. I found the ward in a newer section of the hospital. There were people there. Normal people. I delivered the money, exchanged a few words, and left quickly, relief washing over me. That relief didn't last long. When I reached for my phone to call my boss again, my pocket was empty. I searched everywhere. My bag, the canteen, the hallway. Nothing. The last place I clearly remembered using it was near the maternity building, so I went back. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The flickering light upstairs was still there. As I searched the ground, my phone suddenly started ringing. The sound wasn't coming from beside me. It was coming from above. I looked up. A figure stood behind the window glass. It didn't move. I shouted, demanding my phone back. In response, the ringing stopped, and the figure slowly stepped away into darkness. That was when I ran inside. The lights turned on again as I climbed the stairs. The corridor upstairs was long, narrow, and eerily clean. Halfway down, I heard soft sobbing. A woman sat at the far end, knees pulled to her chest, rocking gently. Her hospital gown was loose, her hair covering her face. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I grabbed a wheelchair and pushed it toward her. The lights went out. The crying stopped. When the lights flickered back on, the corridor was empty. I turned and she was standing near the stairs. Her feet didn't touch the floor. Dark stains spread across the front of her gown, and a slow, wet sound filled the air, like something dripping onto tile. The smell hit me next. Iron and rot. I ran. I locked myself in the nearest room, gasping for air. From somewhere close, a soft humming began. A lullaby, off-key, sung too slowly. The door creaked open by itself. She was inside now. I don't remember everything after that clearly, only flashes, her cold hand, the sound of my head hitting the floor, the humming never stopping. When I woke up again, I was falling. I had jumped. I woke up for real in a hospital bed, surrounded by my family. They told me a night janitor found me unconscious outside the old building. Later, a doctor quietly told me that the maternity wing had been closed years ago after a series of unexplained deaths. One woman, he said, was still sometimes seen by staff who worked late. I never went back there. Some places don't forget what happened inside them, and sometimes they wait. This happened a few years ago in Japan, and for a long time I didn't know how to talk about it. Even now, I'm not completely sure what actually happened that night, but the feeling it left behind has never really gone away. This might be a little longer than usual, but I'll start from the beginning. About 4 years ago, I was living in Saitama and working as an air conditioner installation technician for a fairly large company. The company name carried weight, but the salary didn't. It was enough to survive, not enough to breathe. Because of that, I was constantly stressed, and my family knew it. My mother used to tell me that earning less was fine as long as I stayed close to home, but I wanted something more stable. One day, a senior from my field told me about contract work near the outskirts of Tokyo. Still AC installation, but the pay was almost triple. Accommodation and food were provided too. It sounded perfect. After weeks of convincing my mother and promising her daily video calls, I finally accepted the offer. I was nervous, but also excited. It was my first time working so far away in a place where I didn't know anyone. A few months into the job, sometime in early summer, our company received an urgent request. A private hospital in a semi-rural area of Chiba needed several AC units installed immediately. Renovation work was underway, and the hospital needed to be operational soon. Our manager said it had to be done that very night, no matter what. By the time we reached the site, it was already late. The hospital stood alone, far from the main road, surrounded by trees and empty plots of land. It looked old, too old, and most of the lights were off. A single security guard met us at the entrance, showed us where the AC units were stored, explained the installation points, and then casually told us his shift was over. He left without hesitation, locking the main gate behind him. There were only 3 of us inside the hospital, me and 2 helpers. The silence inside the building felt heavy, like sound itself didn't want to travel. Even our footsteps echoed longer than they should have. We spent nearly 2 hours just figuring out the layout. Hallways twisted in strange ways, rooms looked identical, and the building felt larger on the inside than it had from outside. By around 12:30 a.m., we finally began drilling. That's when it happened. As soon as the drill bit broke through the wall, a thin, dark red line slowly crept downward. At first, I told myself it was rusted water from an old pipe. I had seen that before. But this felt different. The liquid was thicker, and a few drops splashed onto my shirt. Both helpers froze. I forced myself to stay calm and told them it was nothing, that old buildings sometimes did this. We abandoned that spot and moved on, but the uneasiness stayed with us. Not long after, one of the helpers said the place felt wrong. He suggested we come back during the day. I wanted to agree, but orders were orders. We couldn't leave. When we started routing the piping to the upper floor, things began to escalate. One helper went upstairs, then suddenly screamed. When I ran up, I saw deep scratch marks on his hand as if fingernails had dug into his skin from inside the wall. He refused to continue and ran out of the building without looking back. That left just two of us, and that's when we started hearing footsteps in the corridor. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside the room and then started again from far away. At that moment, I realized something was very, very wrong. The footsteps kept repeating the same pattern. They would start far down the corridor, slow and steady, then stop right outside the room we were working in. After a few seconds of silence, they would begin again, as if whoever, or whatever, was walking had turned around and decided to try once more. I told my remaining helper not to panic and to stay focused on the work, but my own hands were shaking. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the temporary lights, the faint vibration of the drill, even our breathing sounded unnatural in that place. When it was time to pull the second pipe up to the rooftop, my helper flat out refused to go upstairs. His face had lost all color. So, I told him to stay put and said I'd do it myself. As I climbed the stairwell, I noticed something strange. One of the patient call lights was on, an old-style indicator that lit up when someone in a room pressed a button for assistance. But this hospital was supposed to be empty, renovation only. No staff, no patients. I moved slowly toward the room, every step heavy. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing, no breathing, no movement. I gently slid the door open. The room was empty, but the bed was still swaying, now like someone had just stood up from it seconds earlier. My chest tightened. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. If someone had been there, I would have seen them leave. There was nowhere else to go. That was the moment my instincts screamed at me to leave. Job be damned. As I turned back toward the stairs, my helper suddenly came limping toward me, panic written all over his face. He told me that while he was setting up a ladder below, someone had yanked it out from under him. He fell hard, scraping his arms and legs. I tried to rationalize it. I told him ladders slip, old floors shift, but he snapped back at me, saying he'd done this work for years and knew the difference. He said the security guard hadn't left early for no reason. He knew what happened in this building at night. Before I could respond, we heard it again. This time, the footsteps were faster. They were running. I told my helper to sit down and not move while I went to check the corridor. I followed the sound as it darted down the hallway. Then suddenly, a door slammed shut at the far end. At the same time, a low growling sound came from a nearby window, deep and wet, like something breathing through clenched teeth. I felt watched, hunted. I opened the door where the footsteps had disappeared. The room was pitch black. I turned on the light. Nothing. I told myself I was imagining things and moved to the next room. When I opened that door, my mind simply stopped. Inside were several small human-like figures, 8 or 9 of them, short, twisted, and pale. Their faces were wrong. Too wide, too still. They were staring straight at me. I didn't think. I ran. Behind me, I heard them moving. Fast, uneven footsteps, slapping against the floor. I didn't look back. I grabbed my injured helper, threw his arm over my shoulder, and dragged him up the stairs to the rooftop. We slammed the door shut and locked it. We stayed there, crouched in a corner, listening. From below, the sounds multiplied. Footsteps, scratching, distorted voices, and something that sounded like laughter mixed with screaming. I didn't tell my helper what I had seen. I knew it would break him. Around 4 a.m., my phone finally rang. A friend of mine, awake for early morning prayers, answered my desperate call and agreed to come with a few others. It took them nearly an hour to reach us. By the time dawn lightened the sky, we were still too afraid to go back down. When my friends arrived, we pulled them up to the rooftop and left the hospital together without saying a word. Later that day, I reported everything to my company. The police were called. After investigating, they found enough disturbing evidence to seal the hospital permanently. Renovation stopped. The building has been abandoned ever since. After that incident, company policy changed. No night work without security, client side and company side. As for me, I refused all night jobs from then on. Before that night, I didn't really believe in things like this. But when something happens to you directly, belief stops being a choice. Even now, whenever I pass an old hospital in Japan, I don't look at the windows. I'm afraid something inside might be looking back. This didn't happen to me directly. It's something that happened to a colleague of mine, or maybe it was a colleague of his. Stories like this get passed around quietly where I'm from. If you meet anyone who has worked night shifts in hospitals around my area, there's a chance they've heard something similar. People usually think graveyards are the places with the most dead, that all the dead stay buried there. But people who work in hospitals know better. Hospitals are places where death happens every day. Sometimes suddenly, sometimes quietly. The body eventually leaves, but the feeling doesn't, and some believe the spirit never does. I live near a mountainous region in Japan, not far from an old industrial town. There's a general hospital there. I won't name it. Everyone local already knows which one I mean. There's a rumor about that hospital, about its top floor. They say the 5th floor was closed years ago. Not for renovations, not for safety inspections, just closed. According to people who worked there long ago, patients assigned to that floor never stayed alive for long. Some would complain about hearing footsteps at night. Some said they felt someone standing beside their bed, watching them breathe. And a few nurses claimed they heard a woman humming lullabies in the corridor long after visiting hours ended. Eventually, too many deaths piled up. Families complained. Staff refused night duty. The 5th floor was sealed. Now, a few years back, a young doctor joined that hospital. Her name was Arai. Fresh out of medical school, too new to know the old stories, too eager to prove herself, she volunteered for night shifts, took extra duties, stayed later than everyone else. Some of the senior doctors warned her, but not clearly. They just told her to avoid certain areas at night. One night, close to 2 a.m., the emergency ward was empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows. That's when a woman walked in. She looked pale. Her clothes were old-fashioned, like something from decades ago. She was holding her lower back, breathing heavily, whispering that something felt wrong inside her. Arai offered to help. She asked for basic information. The woman hesitated when asked for family details and finally said, "I came alone. I don't have anyone anymore." Something about that answer unsettled her. Because the ward was quiet and understaffed, Arai decided to take her upstairs, somewhere private. She didn't even realize which elevator she pressed. When the doors opened, she was standing on the 5th floor. The lights were on. That alone should have been impossible. The hallway looked clean, beds neatly arranged, curtains drawn, medical equipment untouched, as if waiting. The woman lay down and asked Arai not to leave her alone. Arai stepped into a storage room to grab supplies. When she came back, the bed was empty. No footprints, no sound, just silence. Confused and shaken, she went back downstairs and asked the receptionist about the patient form she had submitted earlier. The receptionist looked at her strangely and said, "You were talking to no one." Security footage confirmed it. Arai had been standing alone, speaking to empty air. When senior doctors heard where she had taken the patient, their faces changed. They told her the truth. The 5th floor had been sealed over 20 years ago. Locked. Unused. The elevators don't even stop there anymore. Later that night, they all went up together. The floor was dark, dusty, beds overturned, equipment broken and covered in sheets. Nothing like what Arai had seen. As they turned to leave, Arai glanced back one last time. At the end of the hallway, under a flickering light, a woman stood barefoot. She smiled gently and whispered, "Sensei, you'll come again, won't you?" Arai resigned a week later. Even now, night shift workers say that when rain falls and the hospital gets quiet, the elevator sometimes pauses between floors, and a soft humming can be heard above. I don't know what to believe, but no one I know walks hospital corridors at night without reason anymore. Some places don't need gravestones. They already remember the dead. People often ask whether hospitals are actually haunted. In reality, it's not that hospitals themselves are haunted. It's the people who come there. Every day, countless individuals enter hospitals carrying different emotions: fear, pain, regret, despair. Some come holding hope, others come knowing they might not leave alive. And sometimes attached to those people are things that aren't visible, things that don't always leave when the person does. If you believe this is all imagination, or if you think hospitals feel eerie for some psychological reason, then today's incident might make you question that. But this incident took place in Japan, in the mountainous region of Nagano Prefecture. It was shared with us by a woman named Mika. According to Mika, this happened in 2019 during the final year of her nursing course. Until then, her life had been normal, predictable, safe. After completing her studies, Mika was assigned as a trainee nurse at a regional hospital located slightly outside the city. Because she was an intern, she had rotating duties, sometimes day shifts, sometimes night shifts. At first, everything felt exciting. She felt proud wearing the uniform, proud helping patients, proud learning how to care for people not just physically, but emotionally. The first couple of months passed without any trouble. Then one day, a patient named Yui was admitted. Yui was around the same age as Mika, but from the very beginning, something about her felt off. She had no visible injuries, no clear diagnosis, but day by day her condition worsened. She grew weaker, quieter, emptier. Doctors couldn't find a concrete reason. Yui barely spoke. She followed instructions, ate when told, took medicines, but she never initiated conversation, not with doctors, not with nurses, not even with her own parents. She would just sit on her bed, staring ahead as if listening to something no one else could hear. Mika couldn't explain why, but she felt deeply drawn to Yui, a strange sympathy. Whenever she was near her, Mika tried to talk, to joke, to make her smile. Nothing worked. It felt as if Yui wasn't fully present anymore. After a few days, Mika had night duty. Around 2 a.m., while doing rounds, she entered Yui's room and froze. Yui was lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her hands were clenched. Her breathing was shallow. She looked terrified. Mika sat beside her and tried to calm her down, asking what was wrong. For a long moment, Yui said nothing. Then she whispered, "They're standing here again." Mika looked around. There was no one near the door, no one near the windows. The other patients were asleep. Mika told her gently that no one was there. Yui shook her head weakly and said, "My family says the same thing. But look at me. This happened because of them." Mika didn't know what to say. Later, she spoke to Yui's parents. They didn't deny anything. They said Yui had been saying these things for months. They had taken her to doctors, therapists, even spiritual healers. Nothing helped. They were exhausted, broken. The next morning, something unbelievable happened. Yui improved. She ate properly, she spoke, she smiled faintly. Doctors found no abnormalities. Within hours, she was discharged. Mika even took her mother's number, promising to stay in touch. The very next day, Mika received a call. Yui had passed away in her sleep. The doctors later said it might have been a calm before death, a phenomenon where patients suddenly improved before passing. But Mika couldn't forget her. A few days later, back on night duty, Mika began sensing something strange. A familiar presence, a faint scent she associated with Yui. On the same bed where Yui had stayed, a new patient screamed late at night, claiming someone was lying beside her. Someone young, someone cold. Soon after, Mika started dreaming of Yui, standing silently, shaking, staring directly at her this time, not the ceiling. Then one night in the dream, Yui's expression changed. Her eyes darkened. Her face twisted in pain. Mika woke up, gasping. Unable to ignore it, she contacted Yui's family. What they told her shook her deeply. They had been experiencing the same things. Eventually, they sought help from a spiritual practitioner in rural Japan, someone believed to help unsettled spirits communicate. According to them, Yui revealed that she had been subjected to a forbidden ritual by someone obsessed with her, a ritual meant to slowly drain life, and because of that, she couldn't leave peacefully. After prayers and rites were performed, everything stopped. No more dreams, no more presence. Mika said she never felt anything like that again. Hospitals look normal during the day, but at night, they remember things, and sometimes they don't let go. In April 2016, I started working at a hospital in Nagano, Japan. At first, I was assigned the general shift. Gradually, as I learned the routine, I got my first night shift. Night shifts were quieter, less work. The timing was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most of the activity was between 11:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., after which it was mostly rest. During my first few nights, I became familiar with one of the nurses. She asked me to accompany her upstairs. She had a relative admitted there, and I understood she wanted me to monitor them more closely. I went to the ward and met a young girl scheduled for heart surgery that night. She seemed fragile, quiet, almost fragile enough to shatter. I did my rounds to make sure other patients were settled and then rested for a while before the morning. After my shift ended, I ran into that nurse again. I asked, "How is the girl?" She said quietly, "The surgery went fine, but she didn't make it." Her words hit me, but duty called. I stayed back to arrange the ambulance and prepare the room. Only after everything was done did I go home. That night, after eating and bathing, I went to sleep. The next night, my shift began again. By 12:30 a.m., I was doing rounds in the same ward. Everyone was asleep. When I checked the girl's bed, a chill ran over my hand as though something or someone had brushed it. A dustbin at the corner seemed to tilt slightly on its own. I quickly finished checking and left the ward. That bed was near a large window. As I passed, I noticed the curtain moving, though there was no wind. I shivered and went straight to the staff room. There, a senior nurse noticed my pale face and said softly, "You're new. You'll get used to it, but be careful. Something happened here once to a boy who couldn't finish his night shifts. He kept saying he saw something, and he never returned." I nodded, feeling a weight settle in my chest. Days passed, and the hospital nights seemed normal. But one evening, the boy who usually worked with me called in, saying he couldn't come due to heavy rain. I was alone. I went to the storage room to collect supplies. A cleaning lady was mopping, silently, her face hidden in shadows. I greeted her, but she didn't answer. I grabbed what I needed and left. When I stepped outside the storage room, I saw her again, sweeping the corridor, though I hadn't seen her move. I went back inside. The room was empty. Only some water had spilled on the floor. My anxiety began to grow. I checked the CCTV. One camera showed me standing by the door. The other flickered with static, as though the feed wasn't working. Later, I fell asleep in the staff room, exhausted. I had a dream. I saw a family member trapped under a river, struggling, but no one could help. I woke up startled. The corridors were silent, only a faint hum of equipment. Then I felt it, someone standing behind me. I turned, and a shadow moved past the window, sliding silently. My heartbeat quickened. I got up, walked the corridors, trying to calm myself. By 5 a.m., the shift ended. 2 other staff arrived, and I left for home, still uneasy. The fear only stayed in the hospital. At home, I could breathe again. I tried to ignore it, but when my next night shift arrived, the memories returned. That night, I had another dream. My sister trapped in icy water, screaming for help. I woke up drenched in sweat. Then I saw it. A hand sliding across the window from below, a figure running silently along the corridor. My chest tightened. I finally went to the manager, explained everything. He laughed. "It's nothing," he said. "Don't tell anyone. Stay quiet or leave." I requested to switch to day shifts. He agreed. I finished the month and quit. Weeks later, I heard from the nurse. The new night staff reported similar experiences. It wasn't in my head. No one lasted long in the night shift there. Since then, I've avoided night shifts. Hospitals are calm by day, but at night, the atmosphere changes. Something lingers. Something watches. Years later, even now, I remember that cold hand on my arm, the silent shadows sliding past the windows, and the feeling that something unseen is always there, waiting for night to fall. Even ordinary places can hide extraordinary fears. A morgue is considered a deeply unsettling place, especially one hidden away from the public eye. An elderly man named Mr. Takahashi used to live behind an old wooden caretaker's house near a small town in rural Nagano, Japan. Many years ago, Mr. Takahashi worked as a night attendant at a Christian mission hospital that had been built during the early post-war years. At that time, the hospital stood on the edge of a forested slope known locally as Hoshimi Hill. About 100 meters higher up the mountain, there was a concrete structure that had once served as a storage shed. Over time, it was converted into a temporary morgue. Mr. Takahashi once told me about a disturbing incident from those days, one he still finds difficult to speak about. This happened during the period when he was assigned night duty at the morgue. One evening, the body of a man was discovered in a nearby mountain stream. The current had carried the body down from higher up the slopes. By nightfall, the corpse was transported to the morgue on the hill. That same night, Mr. Takahashi was alone on duty. The body was placed on a metal table and covered carefully with a white cloth. Mr. Takahashi often said that dead bodies never frightened him. No matter how late the hour or how lonely the surroundings, lifeless forms had never troubled his mind. However, that night was different. A close friend of his had promised to stop by and keep him company during his shift. While waiting, Mr. Takahashi walked slowly around the room, humming a familiar old song under his breath. Still, time seemed unnaturally slow, as if the minutes were resisting movement. He felt restless, eager for his friend to arrive. Eventually, he sat down on a wooden chair facing the table. The air felt strange. The silence was unusually heavy, thicker than any quiet he had experienced before. As unease crept in, his eyes drifted toward the covered body directly across from him. He began thinking about the man who lay beneath the cloth. How had he fallen into the stream? Had he struggled against the current? Did he know he was going to die? What kind of life had he lived? What regrets or hopes had filled his final thoughts? One serious problem with that morgue was the lack of electricity. The building relied on a single oil lantern mounted on a hook nearby. By then, the flame had grown weak, its light trembling against the walls. Takahashi assumed the oil was nearly gone. He stood up and adjusted the wick, but the lantern suddenly went out. He shook it gently. There was still oil inside. He relit it, turned the flame higher, and returned to his seat. Only moments later, the lantern dimmed again, and then died completely. As darkness swallowed the room, Mr. Takahashi felt something move across his field of awareness, like a shape passing silently between him and the table. His heart began to race. He could hear the pounding in his ears. His legs felt hollow, as though the strength had drained from them. If he had been able to move, he would have run, but his body refused to respond. Fear locked him in place. He tried to shout, to call for help, but no sound came out. Then he sensed it again. Not footsteps exactly, but a slow, deliberate shift in the air, growing closer. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. The room was now completely dark. Suddenly, he felt a cold pressure against his hand. Not a grip, just contact. That sensation slid upward, slowly tracing along his arm, reaching his throat. In an instant, he became aware of something standing just behind him. Then, just as silently, the presence felt as though it had moved in front of him. A crawling sensation spread across his body, like something slithering over his skin. He remained frozen, unable to resist, unable to escape. After what felt like an eternity, Takahashi collapsed and lost consciousness. When he came to, there was weight on his chest. Startled, he gasped and sat up. Standing before him was his friend, the same one who had promised to visit. Mr. Takahashi looked around the room. Everything appeared unchanged. The body was still on the table, but when his gaze fell to the feet beneath the cloth, he noticed something wrong. The big toe of the right foot was missing. His friend asked why he had been lying on the floor. Mr. Takahashi wanted to explain everything, but fear of being ridiculed stopped him. He said nothing and returned home after his shift. Later that night, when he undressed, he noticed faint marks on his clothes. They looked like impressions, almost like footprints. What chilled him most was that one of those impressions lacked the big toe on the right side. That was when he understood. Whatever had touched him in the dark was not imaginary. It was the same man who lay on the table. Mr. Takahashi refused to ever return to that morgue again. He resigned the next day. Even now, he says that whenever he remembers that night, a cold shiver runs through his body. Some places in Japan, especially in the mountains, do not forget what happens within them. I currently live in Japan, in a quiet prefecture where the nights feel longer than they should. The place where this happened is not exactly a hospital, but a public facility connected to one, an old municipal body preservation wing built decades ago during the early post-war years. It's located on the outskirts of town, not far from a river, surrounded by tall cedar trees that block most of the moonlight at night. The story itself doesn't start with me. It starts with my cousin, Ryo. Ryo came from a modest family. His father had been a factory worker until an accident damaged his spine, and his mother worked part-time cleaning offices. Because of financial pressure, Ryo dropped out of vocational school early and started looking for any job that paid regularly. In rural Japan, stable work matters more than dignity sometimes. That's how he ended up as a night caretaker at the preservation wing. It wasn't a position many people wanted. The job involved staying overnight, monitoring the outer premises, keeping records, and making sure no unauthorized person entered the building. He wasn't supposed to touch anything inside. In fact, his supervisor was very clear about that on the first day. "You sit outside," the man said calmly. "After midnight, don't go into the inner halls, no matter what you hear." Ryo laughed it off at the time. Japan is a country of rules, and sometimes people exaggerate things just to keep discipline. He assumed it was just protocol. For months, nothing happened. The nights were quiet, too quiet. Occasionally, wind rattled the metal fencing, or stray cats fought near the dumpsters. Ryo adjusted to the routine. He even said the job felt peaceful compared to daytime labor. A year later, his life changed. His wife became pregnant. Money grew tight. Hospital visits, medication, preparations, everything added pressure. When her final month arrived, she was admitted earlier than expected due to complications. Ryo panicked. Missing even one night shift would reduce his already small income. That's when he called me. At the time, I was unemployed, drifting between part-time work. I wasn't afraid of odd jobs, and I didn't believe much in ghost stories. Ryo asked if I could cover for him for 2 or 3 nights while he stayed near the hospital. Before agreeing, he hesitated. "There's one thing," he said. "If the supervisor tells you something, just listen. Don't argue." I didn't think much of it. The supervisor gave me the same warning. "After midnight, don't go inside, even if you hear footsteps, even if someone calls out." I asked why. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "This building remembers people." That was it. My first night passed normally. The second night, however, was different. Around 1:40 a.m., I noticed a sound. Not loud, not sudden. It was rhythmic. A soft dragging noise like something being slowly pulled across a smooth floor. It came from deep inside the building. I froze. The sound stopped. A few minutes later, it returned, closer this time. I told myself it was thermal expansion, old infrastructure, air pressure. Japan has earthquakes, buildings make noise. But then I heard something else. Breathing. Slow. Labored. Too deliberate. Against my better judgment, I stood up. I didn't enter the inner hall. I just opened the first sliding door and looked down the corridor. The lights were dim, motion-activated, flickering weakly. At the far end of the hallway, one storage tray was partially extended. Just one. No alarms. No emergency lights. I stepped back. That's when the tray slid in by itself, smoothly, quietly. I returned to my chair and didn't move for nearly an hour. When the sounds finally stopped, exhaustion took over. I must have dozed off. I woke up to cold fingers gripping my wrist. I screamed and fell backward, but there was no one there. The hallway lights were on. Every tray inside the building was fully extended. Not violently, not chaotically, perfectly aligned, as if something had been carefully inspecting the room. I don't remember running. I only remember waking up on the floor near the entrance as morning staff arrived. They didn't ask questions. Neither did I. When Ryo returned later that day, smiling, exhausted, telling me his child had been born safely, I said nothing. Months passed. One night, during a quiet family gathering, Ryo admitted something. He said that during his first year at that job, he once ignored the warning and entered the inner hall. He saw shapes standing beside the trays, not bodies, not people, just impressions like heat distortion in human form. They weren't angry, he said. They were waiting. We never spoke about it again. The preservation wing was shut down 2 years later. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still hear that dragging sound in my memory. Slow, careful, patient. And I understand now why they told us not to go inside. There was an old hospital near my hometown in Japan. It stood on the edge of a residential area where new apartment buildings had slowly grown around it over the years. The hospital was officially closed, not abandoned in the usual sense. The lights were off, the gates were locked, but the structure was still maintained, just enough to keep it from collapsing. People called it Kuroyama General Hospital. It had stopped operating years ago after a series of administrative scandals. Nothing supernatural on record, just missing files, mishandled remains. Entire departments shut down quietly without explanation. When I was in my early 20s, I moved abroad for work. Years later, during one visit back to Japan, I stayed at my old friend Haruki's apartment. It was near a busy train line. Life felt normal again. Late dinners, vending machine coffee, missed trains. That's when the dreams began. Every night I found myself walking through a hospital corridor. Not running, not panicking, just walking. The ceiling lights flickered weakly above me. Patient room doors lined both sides of the hallway. Each door had a small rectangular window. Some rooms were empty. Some had curtains drawn. The strange part was the silence. Hospitals are never truly quiet, but this one was. After several nights, I noticed something new in the dream. Some doors didn't have nameplates. Instead, they had small metal tags. No names, just numbers. I started waking up with a dull pressure behind my eyes, like I hadn't slept at all. One morning, without really thinking, I drew the corridor, the angle of the ceiling lights, the spacing between the doors, the nurse's YHF station at the far end, dark, unmanned. After that, the dreams stopped. Weeks later, Haruki invited a few friends over. One of them was a man named Mizuno. He noticed the sketch. He stared at it longer than was comfortable. "Where did you see this hospital?" he asked. I told him it was just something from a dream. His expression changed. "That's the old hospital near my hometown," he said. "The second floor, the long-term care ward." He told us his aunt had worked there as a nurse years ago. According to her, the ward was closed suddenly after an internal audit. Patients were transferred overnight, records sealed, staff reassigned, no explanations given. The building still stood. Against better judgment, the three of us decided to visit. The hospital looked smaller in real life, but heavier. The main entrance was chained shut, but a side door near the emergency ramp had been forced open long ago. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant, even after all those years. The second floor was exactly like my drawing. The same corridor, the same spacing, the same nurse's station. Patient rooms were empty, beds removed, curtains gone. But on some doors, the metal number tags were still attached. Mizuno said we should leave. Then we heard something. From inside one of the sealed rooms at the end of the hall. Not a scream, not crying, just the slow, deliberate sound of a hospital bed being adjusted. The mechanical click, a pause, then click again. Haruki whispered that the power had been cut years ago. The sound stopped. We didn't open the door. We left the hospital. Not running. 2 months later, the building was demolished, replaced by a parking complex. No articles, no investigation, just gone. Weeks after that, I found the sketch again. Only then did I notice something I hadn't intentionally drawn. One of the room doors in the sketch had a number, the same number that had been attached to the sealed room, the one we never opened. I don't dream about that hospital anymore. But sometimes, when I'm in a hospital late at night, when the hallway lights dim and the nurse's station goes quiet, I hear a familiar sound behind closed doors, a bed being adjusted, slowly, as if someone is still being prepared long after discharge. I grew up in a small town where everyone knows everyone else. There was only one major hospital in the area, a government hospital that served not just our town but several surrounding villages as well. It wasn't some abandoned or isolated place. It was always busy during the day. Patients, nurses, families, noise, life. But at night, the place felt completely different. I didn't think much about it back then. After finishing school, I moved to a nearby city for college. I used to come back home whenever I could, mostly during holidays. My parents still lived in the same house, and nothing in my hometown really changed. Same roads, same buildings, same hospital. During one summer break, I found out that an old family friend of ours had been admitted to that hospital. He wasn't critically ill, but he had been there for a few days for observation. My parents asked me if I could visit him one evening because they were busy. I went after dinner, thinking it would be a quick visit. By the time I reached the hospital, it was around 10:30 at night. Visiting hours were technically over, but in small-town hospitals, no one really enforces rules strictly. I walked past the main gate, and the first thing I noticed was how quiet it had become. The daytime chaos was gone. Only a few tube lights were on, flickering weakly in the corridors. The security guard barely looked at me when I entered. I found my way to the general ward where my friend was admitted. The corridor smelled strongly of disinfectant mixed with something metallic. Most patients were asleep. A few were awake, staring at the ceiling. Some beds were empty, curtains drawn halfway. I talked to my friend for about 10 minutes. He seemed tired but stable. Before leaving, I asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and told me to go home, saying it was late. As I stepped out of the ward, I realized how empty the corridor had become. The nurses' station down the hall was dark. No nurses, no doctors, just silence, broken occasionally by distant coughing or the sound of machines beeping from other rooms. While walking toward the exit, I heard something that made me slow down. It sounded like someone softly calling for help. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Hospitals are full of strange sounds, especially at night. I kept walking, but then I heard it again. A low, weak voice coming from one of the side wards. I stopped. I told myself it was probably a patient who needed assistance and that I should inform a nurse. But when I looked around, there was no one. The nurse's station was still empty. The lights in that side ward were dim, almost off. I stood there for a few seconds, debating whether to go in. Finally, I took a few steps toward the sound. Inside the ward, there were several beds. Most of them were empty. At the far end, separated by a thin curtain, I could hear the voice more clearly. It wasn't loud, it was tired, strained, like someone who had been calling for a long time. I pulled the curtain aside slightly. There was an elderly man lying on the bed. He looked extremely weak. His IV stand was there, but the tube had slipped out of his arm. Blood had dried along his wrist. His eyes were open, staring somewhere past me. He noticed me and tried to speak, but only a faint sound came out. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained. I wasn't supposed to be there. Panic started creeping in. I remember thinking, someone else will come. A nurse will come. This isn't my responsibility. I told him I'd get help and stepped back. But instead of going toward the nurse's station, I walked faster toward the exit. My heart was pounding. I kept telling myself that hospital staff must already know about him, that it wasn't possible for a patient to be completely unattended. I left the hospital and went home. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the man's face. Still, I convinced myself that everything would be fine by morning. The next day, around noon, I saw a local news update on my phone. An elderly patient had been found dead in the hospital during morning rounds. Preliminary reports suggested negligence, as the patient had gone into shock overnight. The ward number mentioned in the article was the same one I had entered. I felt sick. Later, I asked my parents about it casually, pretending I didn't know much. They told me the man had been admitted alone with no family visiting him regularly. He had been calling for help late at night, but no one heard him. I didn't say anything after that. To this day, I haven't told anyone that I heard him, that I saw him, that I walked away. The hospital still stands there, operating every day like nothing happened. But every time I pass by it, I remember that some horrors don't come from ghosts or shadows. Sometimes they come from silence, fear, and the choice to do nothing. And that's the part that still haunts me. This happened about 9 years ago, when my husband and I were living in the Kansai region of Japan. At the time, we were newly married and had no children. We were both healthy adults who had never experienced anything supernatural, and we didn't believe in ghosts or curses. If something went wrong, we believed there was always a scientific explanation. My husband worked for a transportation company, and his job often required him to work late hours. I worked remotely for a publishing firm, so I spent most of my time at home. Life was quiet and predictable until the hospital visit. It started when I developed persistent abdominal pain and fever. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was stress or poor eating habits. But one night, the pain became unbearable, and my husband took me to a nearby general hospital. It wasn't a large modern facility, but an older municipal hospital that had clearly been standing there for decades. The building looked ordinary, clean, functional, nothing frightening about it. The emergency staff admitted me immediately and diagnosed me with a bile duct infection. I was told I would need to stay for observation. That single night turned into nearly 3 weeks. During my stay, I noticed something strange, not terrifying, but deeply unsettling. The ward was unusually quiet, even for a hospital. Nurses moved efficiently, but rarely spoke unless necessary. At night, the hallway lights were dimmed and the air felt heavy, almost stale. Every night around the same time, just past 2 a.m., I would wake up for no reason. I wasn't in pain, I wasn't thirsty, I was simply awake. And every time, I could hear the sound of a trolley being pushed slowly down the corridor. At first, I assumed it was normal hospital activity, but the sound always stopped outside my room. The door never opened, no footsteps followed, just silence. After a few nights, I mentioned it to a nurse. She smiled politely and told me that no staff rounds were scheduled at that hour. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Then my condition worsened unexpectedly. The inflammation spread to my liver and I developed jaundice. Doctors said it was rare but possible. I stayed longer. My energy drained completely. I felt like the hospital itself was slowly exhausting me. During one late night, when sleep wouldn't come, I noticed something else. The curtain around the neighboring bed moved slightly, even though no one was there. That bed had been empty for days. I thought it was airflow, but the window was closed. When I asked about it the next morning, the nurse said the bed was kept empty intentionally. She didn't explain why. Eventually, the treatment worked, and I was discharged. I returned home weak, but relieved. I thought leaving the hospital meant leaving everything behind. I was wrong. A month later, my husband was rushed to the same hospital with severe chest pain. Tests revealed nothing serious, just extreme stress and exhaustion. Still, he was kept overnight for observation. That night, he called me around 3 a.m. He asked me one strange question. "Did you hear the cart too?" When he came home, he told me what happened. He woke up suddenly and heard a metal trolley stop outside his room. He thought it was a nurse preparing medication. But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty, except for a single wheelchair parked directly outside his room, facing the wall. According to the staff, that wheelchair hadn't been used in years. We later learned something unsettling from a local resident. The hospital had once served as a long-term care facility during the post-war period. Many patients had died there quietly, unattended during understaffed nights. The hospital had been renovated several times, but never relocated. Since then, neither of us has returned to that hospital. Our health gradually improved after cutting all ties with it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was stress. But even now, whenever I wake suddenly at night around 2 a.m., I remember the sound of that trolley rolling down an empty corridor. Some hospitals don't just treat illness, some remember it. This happened about 6 years ago when I was working as a contract maintenance worker at a public hospital in Western Japan. I wasn't a doctor or a nurse. My job was simple: checking electrical systems, backup generators, and temperature controls during night hours. It paid better than daytime work, and I preferred the quiet. The hospital itself was old. It had been renovated many times, but some parts of the building clearly belonged to another era. One of those places was the morgue, located in the basement, far from the patient wards. I rarely had to go there, but once a week I was required to inspect the refrigeration units to make sure they were functioning properly. The task usually took no more than 10 minutes. I had no fear of dead bodies. At least, I thought I didn't. On the night this happened, my shift started like any other. Around 1:30 a.m., I checked the generator room, then headed downstairs with my clipboard and flashlight. The elevator didn't go all the way to the morgue level, so I had to take a narrow stairwell for the last flight. The moment I opened the door to the basement corridor, I noticed something was different. The air was warmer than usual. That immediately concerned me. The morgue temperature was supposed to remain strictly controlled. I walked faster, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty hallway. When I reached the morgue entrance, the lights were already on. That shouldn't have been the case. Only authorized staff used that area, and no autopsies were scheduled that night. I checked the logbook near the door, no entries since the previous afternoon. I told myself a staff member must have forgotten to turn off the lights. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Stainless steel tables, closed cold storage drawers, the faint smell of disinfectant. I moved to the control panel and confirmed that all refrigeration units were functioning within normal range. Relieved, I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. A slow, shallow breathing sound. I froze. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence of the morgue, it was unmistakable. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the storage drawers. My first thought was that a patient had been mistakenly declared dead. It sounded ridiculous, but fear makes your mind jump to strange conclusions. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. The breathing continued. With shaking hands, I walked toward the drawers. Each one was labeled with a number and a date. I followed the sound to the last unit on the right. The drawer was slightly open, just a few centimeters. I stared at it for several seconds, unable to move. Morgue drawers were heavy. They didn't open on their own. Summoning every bit of courage I had, I pulled it open the rest of the way. Inside was a body bag, completely zipped. The breathing stopped. I stood there, staring, waiting for something, anything to happen. Nothing did. No movement, no sound. The temperature display remained stable. I closed the drawer, stepped back, and left immediately without finishing my inspection. The next morning, I reported the incident to my supervisor. He looked at me silently, then checked the records. According to the logs, the body in that drawer had arrived 3 days earlier. Cause of death, heart failure. Time of death was clearly recorded. And there was one more detail. That body had already been cremated the previous evening. There was no reason for that drawer to contain anything at all. I quit that job within the week. Since then, I've avoided hospitals at night whenever possible. People say morgues are quiet because the dead don't speak, but sometimes the silence is only temporary. I grew up in a quiet prefecture town where nothing dramatic ever happened. The kind of place where schools, homes, and shops all felt permanently fixed in time. My junior high school stood near the edge of town, surrounded by low hills and narrow roads that led into forested areas. From the classrooms, you could see old buildings scattered far away, most of them long forgotten. When I was in my second year of middle school, our school organized a spring picnic. It wasn't anything special, just a day trip to a nearby nature area with open fields and walking trails. Teachers told us to stay in groups, follow the marked paths, and be back by afternoon. Everyone was excited to get away from classes for a day. We took a bus early in the morning and reached the picnic spot before noon. The place was peaceful, with trees just beginning to grow new leaves. Some students played games, others took photos. Teachers sat together, watching us from a distance. At some point after lunch, a few of us decided to explore a bit further. There was a narrow road leading away from the main area, partially hidden behind trees. A small sign stood there, but the text was faded and hard to read. It didn't look dangerous, just old. We joked about finding something interesting and walked down the road. After about 10 minutes, we realized the others had stopped following. It was just me and one friend left. He said he felt uneasy and wanted to go back. I told him we were probably close to another clearing and that we should check a little further. That was the mistake. The road bent slightly, and through the trees, a large concrete structure came into view. It was an old hospital. The windows were broken, the paint was peeling, and vines covered parts of the walls. A rusted sign near the entrance confirmed what it once was, though the hospital's name had been scratched out. I had never heard of a hospital being there. My friend immediately refused to go any closer. He said it felt wrong and told me to come back with him. I laughed it off, saying we'd only look from outside. After a short argument, he walked back alone, promising to tell a teacher if I didn't return soon. I stayed. The hospital looked abandoned for decades. Yet strangely, the main entrance wasn't sealed. The doors hung open slightly, swaying as the wind passed through. I could hear something faint inside, maybe the wind moving through empty corridors, maybe something else. I stepped closer. The moment I entered, the air changed. It felt colder, heavier. Sunlight barely reached inside, and the smell was hard to describe. Dust, rust, and something stale, like old medicine. I told myself I would leave in a minute. The corridor stretched deep into the building. Old signboards still hung from the ceiling, pointing toward departments that no longer existed. My footsteps echoed loudly, far louder than they should have. Then I heard another sound. Not footsteps, something slower, dragging. I stopped walking. The sound came from somewhere ahead, deep inside the hospital. It wasn't constant, but it repeated as if something was being pulled across the floor. I felt my chest tighten. I knew I should leave, but curiosity kept me frozen. I took one more step forward. That was when I realized the sound had stopped, and something was now breathing nearby. I stood there, holding my breath without realizing it. The sound of breathing was close enough that it didn't echo. It felt like it was coming from just beyond the nearest doorway. I whispered a soft, "Hello?" Not because I expected an answer, but because silence felt worse. No reply came. I told myself it had to be my imagination. Old buildings make noises, wind moves through broken windows, pipes expand and contract. That's what adults always say. I took a step backward. That's when I noticed the wheelchair. It was positioned in the middle of the corridor, facing away from me. I was sure it hadn't been there a moment ago. Its rubber wheels were cracked with age, and one footrest was missing. The chair itself looked old, far older than the rest of the equipment scattered around. I didn't remember hearing it move. I turned my head toward the entrance, thinking about running, but something stopped me. From one of the rooms on the right, I heard a soft clicking sound, like fingernails tapping against metal. Click, click, pause, click. It was slow and deliberate. I backed away until my shoulder hit the wall. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure someone, or something, would hear it. The clicking stopped. Then a voice spoke. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it sounded confused. "Is it time?" The words came from the room beside me. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight. I couldn't move. I stared at the doorway, watching the darkness inside it, waiting for something to step out. Nothing did. Instead, the smell in the hallway changed. The sharp scent of disinfectant grew stronger, like the room was suddenly clean again, as if the hospital was trying to remember what it used to be. The lights flickered. For just a moment, the hallway didn't look abandoned anymore. The walls looked freshly painted, the floor looked polished. I could hear distant footsteps, distant voices, the sound of a hospital in use. Then everything snapped back. The wheelchair began to roll. It moved slowly, inch by inch, turning toward me without making a sound. I didn't wait to see it fully face me. I ran. My shoes slipped on the dusty floor as I sprinted toward the entrance. The dragging sound returned behind me, faster now, mixed with uneven breathing. I didn't look back. I burst out of the hospital and didn't stop running until I reached the main picnic area. Teachers rushed toward me, angry at first, then confused when they saw my face. I tried to explain where I had been, but the words came out wrong. All I could say was, "There's something there." They called my parents and took me home early. That night, I developed a high fever. For days afterward, I kept hearing hospital sounds when I tried to sleep. Wheels rolling, metal clicking, someone whispering questions that didn't need answers. My parents thought it was stress. A week later, I overheard my teachers talking. The hospital I had wandered into wasn't just abandoned. Years ago, it had been closed suddenly after multiple patients died due to negligence. Some of them were left unattended during night shifts. The building was supposed to be sealed off, but it never fully was. I never told anyone about the voice. Even now, whenever I pass an old building with broken windows, I feel that same cold air. And sometimes, late at night, I hear slow breathing in places where no one should be. I don't think the hospital was empty. I think it was waiting. My parents had always wanted to leave the city. After years of cramped apartments and constant noise, the idea of a quiet life somewhere peaceful started to feel necessary rather than optional. That was how we ended up finding the house. It was on the outskirts of a small town in Japan, far enough from the station that taxis were rare, but close enough to feel livable. The price was unusually low for a detached home with land. When my father asked the real estate agent why, the answer was vague. The area isn't very popular anymore. We didn't think much of it. Behind the house, across a narrow forested slope, stood a large concrete building. From certain angles, you could see it clearly. It was an old military hospital from the war era, long abandoned, officially off limits. The windows were broken. The walls were stained dark by time. Trees had begun growing into parts of the structure itself. The agent mentioned it casually, as if it were nothing more than an old warehouse. The first few weeks after moving in were normal, quiet, even pleasant. At night, you could hear insects and wind through the trees. My parents slept better than they had in years. I thought we'd made the right choice. The sounds started subtly. At first, it was just distant noises late at night. A dull metallic echo, like something heavy being moved far away. We assumed it was construction, or maybe animals wandering around the abandoned hospital. But construction didn't explain one thing. The sounds always happened at the same time, just after midnight. One night, my mother asked if I had been walking around upstairs. I hadn't. My father said it might be the house settling. Old houses make noise. Then we noticed the lights. From my bedroom window, I could see part of the hospital's upper floors. One night around 1:30 a.m., a single room lit up. The light was weak, yellowish, like an old bulb struggling to stay on. It flickered for a few seconds and went out. The next night, it happened again. A different window this time. We told ourselves it had to be trespassers, teenagers, curious explorers. That explanation worked until we started seeing movement. A silhouette would sometimes appear in the window. Just standing there, not waving, not moving, just facing outward like it was watching the forest or the houses below, including ours. Once we noticed the figure, it became impossible to ignore the sounds. Late at night, we began hearing footsteps, coming from the direction of the hospital, slow, uneven, not on gravel, not on grass, more like echoes inside long corridors, carried by the wind. My father finally decided to walk closer one evening, just to see if anyone was actually there. He didn't go far. He said the air felt wrong near the forest, colder than it should have been. He said it felt like standing near something that didn't want to be disturbed. The sounds inside our house got worse after that. We started hearing knocking, not on doors, on walls. Soft at first, then harder. Always at night, always from the side of the house facing the hospital. My mother began having trouble sleeping. She said she felt like someone was standing behind her whenever she washed dishes at night. I felt it too sometimes. A pressure in the air, like being watched. Then one night, the lights inside the hospital didn't just flicker. Multiple rooms lit up at once. I remember my parents standing beside me at the window. None of us spoke. The lights turned on floor by floor, as if someone were walking through the building, switching them on one by one. And then we saw them. More than one figure this time. Several silhouettes, moving behind different windows. Some stood still, others moved slowly, stopping, starting, as if unsure where to go. The next morning, my mother told us she heard voices during the night. Not clear words, just murmuring, layered on top of each other, like many people whispering at once. That was when we learned the full history. A local neighbor finally told us what the agent hadn't. During the war, the hospital had been used for wounded soldiers. Many had died there, untreated, overcrowded, forgotten during the final months. After the war, the building was sealed, abandoned. People avoided it. Anyone who lived too close eventually moved away. Within a month, we listed the house again. We didn't argue about it. We didn't try to rationalize it anymore. On our last night there, every window in the hospital was dark, no sounds, no lights. But I still felt eyes on us as we locked the door for the final time. Sometimes cheap houses are cheap, for reasons no one wants to say out loud. That brings us to the end of today's video. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the stories and that they don't follow you into your sleep tonight. If you did enjoy them, don't forget to like the video, comment your favorite story, and tell me where you're listening from. Once again, thank you for being here. This is Mahito, or as you can always call me, Mahito Senpai. Until next time, good night and take care.